Greetings everyone and welcome to SpaceWeek Live for this Sunday, April 3rd, 2022. So, we are picking up on, after 2 weeks. I took a hiatus, a short break last week because, well, I needed it. And the previous week, 2 weeks ago, was pretty quiet. There was only one live stream and no launches. So, rewinding the clock a couple of weeks. Back on March 23rd, U.S. Spacewalk 80 took place with Rogozin and Matthias Maurer to replace radiator beam valve module hoses, amongst other upgrades. This video is obviously being played at 2 times speed. But the spacewalk went off without a hitch, although at the very end, well, at the beginning, I believe it was Matthias Maurer had an issue with a cable on his helmet, and at the end he had some water in his helmet. So during the spacewalk you may have heard them talk about glove and HAP checks. HAP stands for helmet absorption pad. It's basically an absorptive you know, like a sponge or whatever, a cloth they have on the back of the inside of the helmet that the astronaut leans their head back against to detect if there's any water buildup in the helmet. Because, of course, in space, water inside a suit becomes a real problem. I mean, they need water in the suit to regulate temperature, you know, to flow the, you know, the temperature around the suit to keep the astronaut comfortable. But if there's any kind of leak, then of course the water can also pose a risk to the astronaut. But there was no problem. Maurer was fine. They just detected some water in the helmet, and there was some water on his visor. You may recall a few years back, his name escapes me, but there was a famous Canadian astronaut that I'm sure someone will post his name in the chat that had an issue on one spacewalk where he got some like oil or something in his eye, and it made him start tearing up, and he produced so many tears that the tears actually globbed on, because of the surface tension of the water. The tears actually covered over both of his eyes, and he was effectively blinded. because of course you can't reach up with your hand and wipe it off because there's a helmet in the way. So I don't know if he tried shaking his head or what, but in any case, water can be a real challenge in a spacesuit, but it didn't pose a hazard for Matthias Maurer this time around. And as with most spacewalks, their spacewalk time was about 6 hours and 30 minutes. Now, moving ahead to last week was much busier. Last Sunday, the Tianzhou 2 cargo spacecraft undocked from the Chinese space station's Tianhe core module. It arrived at the CSS in May of last year. Like all other cargo spacecraft in the world, except for SpaceX Dragon, Tianzhou 2 was loaded with trash and deorbited over the Pacific. The question of whether Russia was going to leave American astronaut Mark Vande Hei stranded in space has been answered. The Russian space agency Roscosmos never actually threatened to do so, but there was that bizarre video released on Russian state media that showed cosmonauts waving goodbye to Mark Vande Hei, and through the use of whiz-bang computer effects, disconnecting the Russian half of the space station, as well as Roscosmos director Dmitry Rogozin's many inflammatory statements on Twitter and other platforms that caused people to be concerned for the well-being and the future of Mark Vande Hei, because he was scheduled to come back on Soyuz MS-19 on the 30th of March. But last Tuesday MS-19 did return astronaut Mark Vande Hei to Earth, along with cosmonauts Anton Shkaplerov and Pyotr Dubrov. Dubrov and Vande Hei had launched on MS-18 back on April 9th, 2021, spending 355 days in space. This was a new record for an American astronaut, beating Mark Kelly's record of 340 days set in his year in space mission back in 2016. The longest space flight by any human was 437 days, set by Valery Polyakov in 1994 aboard the Russian space station Mir. Anton Shkaplerov launched on MS-19 last October, along with actress Yulia Peresild and filmmaker Klim Shipenko. Of course, those two returned about 10 days later, while Shkaplerov remained on the station. MS-19 touched down in the usual region, southeast of Zhezkazgan, Kazakhstan, about 400 kilometers or 250 miles from the launch site at Baikonur, coincidentally about the same distance as the height of the space station. Also on Tuesday, China launched their Long March 6A rocket for the first time from Taiyuan Satellite Launch Center in northern China's Shaanxi province. Long March 6A is a new generation medium-lift launch vehicle with a liquid-propelled core booster and 4 SRBs. It can launch up to 4 tons into a 700-kilometer sun-synchronous orbit. Let's check out the launch. I'm sorry for the potato cam in that first clip, but that's all we could get our hands on. Just a few hours later, China launched a Long March 11 from Zhuquan in the Gobi Desert with 3 Tianping-2 satellites designed for atmospheric space environment survey and orbital prediction model correction, amongst other things. Unlike most rockets whose engines ignite on the pad, this one is propelled into the air first by a blast of gas, like a missile from a ship. And now the beginning of the video is cut off. Not sure why. Perhaps because China doesn't want us to see their launch mechanism, but who knows. But this is what we've got. So in the replay, you see that plume of gray that's ascending next to the... Oops, I muted myself. That plume of gray that's ascending next to the rocket, that is the exhaust from the blast of gas that launched the rocket into the air. So let's check out the launch again because I want to see it. Yeah, that ignition. So, hey, good job. It reached its target orbit and there were no mishaps. So, I've never noticed that about the Long March 11 before. Maybe I wasn't paying attention, which is quite likely. The next day, on Wednesday, NASA tested another RS-25 developmental engine at Stennis Space Center in Mississippi. Just a reminder, RS-25 are the engines that will be used on the SLS rocket during the Artemis moon missions. This is a developmental engine, an RS-25E, which is the successor to the RS-25D, which were flown on the Space Shuttle. The first few Artemis missions will be using reused legacy RS-25D engines, and successive Artemis missions will use the RS-25E. So this was the 5th hot fire test since last December. The goal was to, quote, gather performance data on a variety of new engine components manufactured with state-of-the-art fabrication techniques like hot isostatic pressure bonding and selective laser melting to reduce both the cost and time to build new engines, unquote. The test lasted 500 seconds, about 8.5 minutes, the same duration it will burn during the Artemis missions. The next day, NASA tested the Orion spacecraft's launch abort motor. Orion is the crew vehicle that the Artemis astronauts will ride on their way to the moon. The launch abort system ensures that if something goes wrong with the rocket during the launch, the crew can be carried away to safety. It uses 3 solid-fueled engines in the launch escape tower at the top of the rocket. On the rocket, the engines will be pointed downward, but for this test, they were flipped upside down so that they pointed upwards.
T-minus 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 5.
Activate quench and deluge.
Quench valve is activated, deluge pump is on. Quench valve is open, N2 is flowing, water deluge is also flowing.
And that's all it takes to save a crew. I don't have this queued up to the right position. Let me find the launch. So that same day, there we go. That same day, Blue Origin launched another crew of 6 space tourists to suborbital space, about 104 kilometers straight up past the Kármán line. On board were Marty Allen, Jim Kitchen, Dr. George Neild, married couple Sharon and Mark Hagel, and Gary Lai, who was the main designer of the New Shepard vehicle. Lai was Blue Origin's 20th employee.
T-minus 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4. Command engine start. 2, 1, 0. Ignition. And liftoff. Shepard's cleared the tower.
And liftoff. Mission Control has confirmed New Shepard has cleared the tower and is on its way to space with our 4th human flight crew.
Godspeed, New Shepard. Godspeed, the Roaring Twenties. Enjoy this ride.
You can see on the lower left-hand side of your screen.
All right, so let's. So the ride takes about 10 minutes. I should say the flight takes about 10 minutes, although it really is a ride. But because the crew don't actually do anything, they just fly up, float around, and then enjoy themselves. Let's see, the booster coming back down lands first.
Velocity of the booster in half. There it is. This is a critical step in slowing the vehicle down before the BE-3 engine is reignited for the final portion of the descent. Boom, man, was that incredible. I love hearing that sound. And the BE-3 engine reignites for the final portion of the descent.
So to date, Blue Origin has had 0 mishaps with their New Shepard vehicle. No RUDs, no failed landings. Nothing has gone wrong with them, which is really quite impressive. I don't know of any vehicles that have that have been quite that successful. However, this is not an orbital rocket; it's suborbital only. And so it's not subject to the same pressures and temperatures that an orbital vehicle would be subject to. For example, it re-enters the atmosphere at about 700 miles per hour, as opposed to the Falcon 9's first stage, which re-enters at about 3,500 miles per hour. And of course, an orbital capsule, such as Dragon or Crew Dragon, re-enters at 17,500 miles per hour. So the booster lands first propulsively, and then the capsule, of course, descends on parachutes, and with a burst of gas at the last second, touches down in the West Texas desert. So then on Friday, SpaceX launched their 4th transporter mission with about 50 small satellites on board. Satellite nanosats, picosats, microsats. They have all sorts of small names for small satellites. Let's check out the launch, and then we will check out the landing.
10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Mission and liftoff of Transporter-4. Pitching downrange. Stage 1 chamber pressure is nominal.
We're at T plus 40 seconds. Awesome views from Falcon 9 punching through the clouds. Falcon 9 has cleared the tower, and we're currently...
Power telemetry nominal.
Okay. I was just looking something up. So, launch was good, and then we got some sweet views of the turquoise waters of the Bahamas as the first stage descended. It actually landed near the continental shelf of the island shelf. Anyway, the shelf where the water, where the land drops off at the edge of the skirt around the island, whatever island that is. I'm not sure which one. North of Cuba somewhere. But we actually also got to see the landing, which we don't always get to do because the video cuts out. Let's check it out.
About a 20-second burn of the single
Nominal
engine.
orbit insertion.
As you can see, we did have a successful landing of our first stage, as well as a confirmation of a nominal second stage orbit.
Now, I think that was actually this booster's first flight. It started out white and it came back a little bit toasty, as with all SpaceX launches. So let's see. Then yesterday, Lab Electron launched Rocket Lab launched an Electron with their Without Mission Abort mission for Black Sky Global after about 4 months of delays due to payload issues unrelated to the rocket.
10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. We have liftoff.
Just take up the button. It's nominal.
Now, from launch to payload deploy was about 50 minutes to an hour, but and they didn't have ground station coverage for most of that, so we got to look at a pretty slick 3D visualization, but we didn't get to see the actual deployment. Now, a question was asked during this launch in the chat about the sparks that we see coming from the engine, and let's see. I think this was the view at the time. So yeah, we see sparks coming from the engine, and it was stated by, I think, Snow Kittens that it was determined that what those sparks are is actually carbon deposits on the inside of the engine bell that are being burned off. So the combustion of the fuel produces carbon deposits on the inside of the engine bell, which are then blasted away by the thrust. So there's a lot going on in those rocket engines. But, all right. Now, the other item of note this past week is that Roscosmos chief Dmitry Rogozin issued a series of tweets which made it sound as if Russia might be pulling out of the International Space Station. And a lot of news outlets and social media, posts phrased it that way, that Russia was ending cooperation on the ISS. But let's take a look at what he actually said. This is obviously on the screen that you see is Russian, but I'll provide you with a Google translation. And by the way, thank you, Yazata and Walled Garden, for your contributions. That's very kind. So rather than hyperbolize or editorialize or speculate, let's actually take a look at what he said per Google. So, and again, this is from Russia's space program director, Dmitry Rogozin. The head of NASA, Senator Nelson, the head of the European Space Agency, Joseph Aschbacher, and the head of the Canadian Space Agency, Lisa Campbell, responded to my appeal to them demanding the lifting of sanctions against a number of enterprises in the Russian rocket and space industry. Let me briefly, for the purpose of the audio podcast audience, read the contents of the letter from NASA Director Bill Nelson to Dmitry Rogozin. Dear General Director Rogozin, thank you for your letter of March 14th requesting clarification on the potential impacts of sanctions applied by the United States government on the continued operations of the International Space Station program. The U.S. continues to support international government space cooperation, especially those activities associated with operating the ISS with Russia, Canada, Europe, and Japan. New and existing U.S. export control measures continued to allow cooperation between the U.S. and Russia to ensure continued safe operations of the ISS. To that end, NASA will continue to work with relevant U.S. federal departments and agencies to facilitate continued cooperation on and operation of the ISS, including any necessary ISS cooperation supported by Johnson Space Center's Central Research Institute of Machine Building and JSC Rocket and Space Center progress. Sustaining safe and successful ISS operations remains a priority for the United States. So that's 3 paragraphs, pretty short and sweet. The letter from Canadian Space Agency President Lisa Campbell. Thank you for your letter of March 14th, and let me scroll down here for you. Thank you for your letter of March 14th requesting clarification on the potential sanctions applied by the Canadian government on the continued operations of the ISS program. I can assure you that Canada continues to support the ISS program and is dedicated to its safe and successful operations. While the Canadian Space Agency has no direct cooperation with JSC TS and whatever, blah, 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 and JSC SRC progress, we will continue to work with the relevant Canadian government organizations to facilitate continued cooperation and operation of the ISS. So, down to 2 paragraphs. And then for the third message, this is from European Space Agency President Josef Aschbacher. Dear Mr. Rogozin, I acknowledge the receipt of your letter dated 14 March regarding sanctions. I will forward your request to the ESA member states as these matters fall under their responsibility, period. And that is the extent of the ESA director's message to Dmitry Rogozin. Now, Rogozin's response to these messages, let's see. The American and Canadian responses are almost carbon copied. In particular, Bill Nelson's letter states that NASA will continue to engage with relevant federal and U.S. agencies to promote further cooperation within the ISS and its operation, including any necessary cooperation. Okay, so this is a quote. All right, so he's quoting the message. With regard to the response of the European Space Agency, Josef Aschbacher acted as a postman, confirming that he does not solve such issues and therefore forwarded my appeal to the EU member states. That is, we are all invited to wait until the bureaucracies of all 28 EU countries deign to read the letter of Roscosmos. By this time, either the donkey will die or the ISS will die by its own death. And if there are any mistakes in the translation by Google that result in phrases being like mistranslated, then I apologize, but I don't read Russian, so. Nevertheless, the position of our partners is clear. The sanctions will not be lifted. At the same time, fearing the destruction of cooperation on the ISS, where the role of Russia is of fundamental importance to ensure the viability and safety of the station, Western partners make it clear that in reality, sanctions in terms of work in the interests of the ISS will not work. That is, he's saying the sanctions will not work to deter Russia. I consider this state of affairs unacceptable. And this is Dmitry Rogozin speaking, of course. Sanctions from the U.S., Canada, and the European Union and Japan are aimed at blocking financial, economic, and production activities of our high-tech enterprises. The purpose of the sanctions is to kill the Russian economy, plunge our people into despair and hunger, and bring our country to its knees. It is clear that they will not be able to do this, but the intentions are clear. That's why I believe that the restoration of normal relations between partners in the International Space Station and other joint projects is possible only with the complete and unconditional lifting of illegal sanctions. Specific proposals of Roscosmos on the timing of the completion of cooperation within the ISS, within the ISS with the space agencies of the United States, Canada, and the European Union and Japan will be reported to the leadership of our country in the near future. So I also watched a video of an interview with Dmitry Rogozin where he was talking about essentially this same stuff. And basically what he's saying is he is opposed to the sanctions, which makes sense as a representative of an agency of the Russian government. He is forwarding his observations and thoughts on the matter to Vladimir Putin. But he ultimately clarifies that it is only Vladimir Putin who can make the decision as to what to do, as the direction for Roscosmos comes from the executive, just as the direction of NASA comes from the executive in this country. So he does not explicitly state that they are pulling out of the ISS. He doesn't, so nothing is set in stone at this point. And bear in mind, they just launched 3 new cosmonauts to the ISS a couple of weeks ago. So, whether they try to ramp their cooperation down, because ISS is a big ship. It's like a big ship, and it doesn't turn on a dime. You can't just wave goodbye and disconnect, whatever. Or even just bring your cosmonauts home and abandon your half of the ISS. It doesn't work that way. So, Rogozin is unhappy. He is sort of issuing rhetoric that is of a vaguely, threatening nature, that there may be consequences to these continued sanctions in the form of ceasing the cooperation on the ISS. But he's not directly threatening to do so, and until we learn what the Russian administration decides to do, it's pretty much business as usual up there. Now, Russia has stated that they're going to stop cooperating with the Germans on experiments, and they're not providing engines to the U.S., and they're not providing launch services to the OneWeb program, which is based in the UK. But the bridge isn't entirely burnt yet, so I wouldn't worry too much. There's a lot of rhetoric and saber rattling that happens in times of conflict such as this, but Russia is very heavily invested in the ISS, and it would be detrimental to themselves if they were to just punch out. But in any case, I wanted to go through those tweets and tell you the translation of exactly what Rogozin said, because if all you do is read the headlines and the media coverage of this discourse, you might have the impression that Russia was, oh my God, Russia's pulling out of the ISS. What are we going to do? And they might, but that again, that ship has not yet sailed, and Rogozin's just making noise at this point, issuing his protest. And there's zero indication from the international ISS partners. Now, we didn't hear from Japan, but we heard from the ESA, from Canada, and from the United States that their full intention is to continue cooperating with Russia and for the purpose of continued operations and maintenance and utilization of the International Space Station. So, it seems like we're good for now, but of course, we will have to keep our eye on the situation. Now, that is it for last week. Looking ahead to this week, on Wednesday, April 6th at 12:05 p.m. Eastern Time, 16:05 UTC, is the launch of a SpaceX Falcon 9 with the Axiom Mission 1. Now, this will be the first civilian launch of crew to the ISS. So the previous Crew Dragon launches were for NASA, and the previous other civilians that had visited the ISS were passengers aboard Soyuz, which is from the Russian government launches. But Axiom 1 will be the first private crew on a private spacecraft to visit the space station. And I'm not sure how long they're going to stay, probably about 10 days, like most of these sort of commercial flights. But on board will be Michael Lopez Alegria, who is a former NASA astronaut, who will be commanding the mission. And then paying passengers Larry Connor, Mark Pathy, and Eaton Stib. Yes, and it will be 10 days. So after 10 days, they will undock from the ISS and return for a splashdown in either the Atlantic or the Gulf. There have been some delays with this launch, but not too bad. But yeah, that'll be exciting. And I'm not sure what they're going to do up there. They're not filming a movie. I don't know if they're going to be participating in some experiments, but in any case, look forward to Axiom 1. Later that day, at 7:50 p.m. Eastern Time, 23:50 UTC, a Chinese Long March 4B will launch the SJ-6 Group 6 satellites. There will not be live coverage of that. And then on Friday, April 8th, starting at 1 a.m. Eastern, 0500 UTC, is the rendezvous and docking of the Axiom 1 mission. So it's taking them a while to get there, and this is what we've seen with previous Crew Dragon launches, is they take their sweet old time getting to their destination, or while getting to the ISS. And I am very curious to know how fast they could get to the ISS if they wanted to. If they wanted to expend the fuel and time it such that they had an optimal launch window and get to the ISS in the minimum amount of time. I wonder how quickly they could do it. But in any case, this particular flight will last about a day and a half. So about, 36 hours, whatever. And then again, they'll be arriving on Friday and staying for about 10 days. And that's actually it. There's two launches, one arrival, 2 live streams for this coming week. Now, I want to take a moment to thank and welcome our newest channel member, Rupert Dippel. Thank you for your membership and contribution to the channel. Let me get to your questions. All right. And thank you again to Chris V for collating these questions. And again, just like I said in the beginning, or rather, actually, I think I forgot to say it in the beginning, but if you do have a question, please make sure to tag my name at rawspace so that we're sure to see it. All right, Mark Desire. I wonder what the political future has in store for the ISS or for space exploration in general. Well, ISS was never positioned to really do much in the way of space exploration. It's anchored to low Earth orbit, and it's really anchored us to low Earth orbit. If not for the ISS, we might have gone farther afield by this time, but it's consumed so many resources for the past 20 plus years that other potential manned spaceflight or crewed spaceflight endeavors have been pushed out. But the main function of the ISS is as an orbiting laboratory to study the effects of space on humans and to conduct lots of experiments for various nations. And that's what they do day to day. The astronauts and the cosmonauts on board the space station are really, they're both maintenance people, but they're also scientists, and they, babysit and conduct all sorts of scientific experiments, as well as other things. There are also commercial products that get sent to the ISS for various reasons and whatnot. But as far as space exploration, the main role of the ISS in space exploration is in educating us on how to deal with space. The zero-G environment is very hard on our bodies. It's not good for it results in dramatic loss of bone density when we're not subjected to 1G of gravity. It has an effect on the pressure in our eyes. It has other physiological effects. The radiation environment of space is very different than down here underneath many miles / kilometers of atmosphere. And of course, the ISS does operate within the protective magnetosphere of the Earth, but it is still an increased radiation environment up there because they don't have the protection of the atmosphere. So, but that's the ISS's primary role in space exploration is in learning what we need to, how different materials behave in space and how humans behave in space, et cetera, which we've been doing since day one, 20 plus years ago. Peter Korten's, that's their small-sat program regarding the Chinese rocket. So the Long March 6, is a medium lift vehicle, so that could launch small sats or large single satellites or pairs of satellites, just like most vehicles could. Snow Kittens regarding the Chinese Long March 11 launch that boinked out of the tube before igniting the engine. There is older footage which does show the barrel, so I haven't. I may have seen that on a previous SpaceWeek. In fact, you could probably search back and find it. But Chris V, what is the acceleration on liftoff of the New Shepard compared to an unmanned rocket? So according to Gary Lai, the designer of New Shepard and the sixth passenger, the honorary passenger on board this latest launch, you feel every bit of that rocket's acceleration. He said it was pretty intense, and he said that when they got to apogee and they became weightless, he said that he experienced some vertigo and he experienced some nausea. Now, not everybody does. Not everybody's impacted by the zero-G sickness, or people handle G forces differently. But in his case, yeah, he felt a little bit roughed up by it. But I looked it up, and supposedly the New Shepard can pull up to 6 Gs of acceleration, which is actually not surprising because it's a small rocket, and small rockets tend to accelerate much more quickly than big rockets. Even though big rockets have much more thrust, they also have much more mass, mostly in the form of fuel. That they're, the rocket equation. You need to carry the fuel to launch the fuel to carry the rocket that's containing fuel. It's all about the fuel. But yeah, so about 6 Gs for New Shepard, and I think that Crew Dragon, the number I saw was 3.3 Gs. That seems about right. Maybe up to 5 Gs for Crew Dragon. But again, that rocket is what, 3 times the height or taller than I think it's a lot taller. Yeah, it's much taller and a more massive rocket than New Shepard. Ian Stobie, they sound more adult than Twitter or this chat. None of them flurfers, probably, regarding the Russian statement. Yeah, Twitter tends to be a bit of a dumpster fire, but it is what it is, I guess. Snow Kittens, I think that we should be the ones pulling out of the ISS program. Of course, Snow Kittens hails from the Netherlands, a member of the ESA, and of course an international partner of the United States, Canada, Japan, and Russia on the ISS. But maybe, it has been argued that the ISS is holding us back, and that we should end it so that we can move on. But it's just like the space shuttle. It's hard to see sort of a beloved icon fade away. Peter Cortons, how would a safe deorbit of ISS work? Will it be disassembled partly? There's basically no way to safely deorbit the ISS. I mean, none of its components are designed for re-entry. Like, in order to re-enter safely, you really have to have a design that is, you absolutely have to have a design that can withstand the 3,500 degree temperatures of re-entry, because you're until that deorbit burn, or until you finally, are slowed down enough by the tenuous upper atmosphere that you start entering the thicker atmosphere, you're going 17,500 miles per hour, whatever that is in kilometers per hour. And unless your craft is designed like a crew capsule with a heat shield, or either ablative or just a heat shield to take the brunt of the frictional heating, or like Starship is being designed with heat tiles that are designed to with metal and heat tiles, whatever, that is designed to distribute and disperse the heat of re-entry. You're not going to survive. Like a metal object, whatever. I mean, fiberglass, anything. It's going to break up and burn up on re-entry. So the only way to take the ISS down safely would be to disassemble all of the modules and bring them down in a craft that is designed to withstand the heat of orbital re-entry, which we no longer have functioning shuttles. So the only way to do that would be potentially with Starship, because there aren't any rockets with payload fairings big enough to accommodate the ISS modules. Furthermore, the ISS modules are all connected together. They've been, the initial assembly of ISS took, what was it, about 8 years? Something like that, 8 to 10 years for the main initial assembly of the ISS. And many space flights and spacewalks, dozens of them. And in order to disconnect all of the modules from each other so that they could be safely deorbited, you would need to do spacewalks to disconnect, hoses and wires and unbolt things from other things, disconnect the the modules from the truss structure, and it would be a major undertaking that would take years to do and cost many billions of dollars for the benefit of having a relic in a museum. I mean, it's very unlikely that any space agency would be willing to foot that bill. It would be nice to have at least a part of the ISS back here for posterity, but realistically, there's no way that that would happen. And so the ISS will be, when its time comes, it will be deorbited over the Pacific, just like all other orbiting objects that are brought down in a controlled manner. Controlled meaning we bring it down in a safe region, as opposed to we don't know where it's going to come down, like the that one Chinese booster, the Long March 5. So it is sad because it's just like the Hubble Space Telescope. It would be nice to bring it back. I mean, it's a amazing instrument, and it's iconic, and it revolutionized our understanding of the cosmos. But bringing it back is not very feasible. We just don't have a vehicle that's suited to do that. I don't even know if Starship would be big enough to bring back Hubble. Yazata says, I think that Russia is basically expressing their displeasure. I'm inclined to think that Russia will stay in the ISS. I would tend to agree. I think that Russia will continue working. I mean, they may continue grumbling, which is, they have every right to do so, but I don't think they're going to abandon the ISS. I could be wrong, but I don't think that they're going to. They're too heavily invested, and I think it would damage themselves too much for them to pull out. Snow Kittens. Russia has no choice to stay in. They would never be able to afford a station on their own. The Chinese station is unreachable until their next-gen spacecraft comes online, likely never in this state. So the Chinese space station orbits at a different altitude, on a different trajectory than the ISS. They couldn't just go from the ISS to the Chinese space station. And I don't know that Russia has a vehicle that is a spacecraft that can even dock with the Chinese space station. I need to look that up, whether the Chinese docking mechanism is at all compatible with the Russian hardware, even if it's inspired by the Russian hardware. But, well, the Soviet Union, and then the Soviet Union, when it existed, did launch a space station, the Mir space station, but and that continued to operate under the Russian Federation until it was deorbited in around the turn of the millennium. What was it, 99, 2000, 2001, something like that. I think it was 2001 that Mir deorbited. But as far as a new space station, I'm not aware of any concrete Russian plans to launch their own station. I mean, it has been mentioned sort of as a far future project, but I'm unaware of any concrete plans by Russia to rebuild their own space station. I'm not sure that they would see the benefit in it for the incredible cost that it would incur, especially given the fact that we have already been, established in space as a species for decades now, and for more than 3 decades. And we've studied the heck out of the human body in space, as well as space hardware, space materials, etc., etc. So it probably wouldn't be worth it to them. Evgeny, good to see you. I was thinking again about the points of the Lagrange, about Lagrange points. Maybe it would be more interesting and informative if one of us could start creating orbital stations at these points. I agree. That would be amazing to have a station at the Earth-Moon L1 Lagrange point, so hovering between the Earth and the Moon, as well as perhaps at the Earth-Sun, or I should say the Sun-Earth L1 Lagrange point, where the NASA Discover satellite is orbiting. And so yes, that would be very useful, because the relative position of the station with respect to the Earth would be fixed. They wouldn't be spinning around the Earth, but well, Earth would be spinning underneath it, we should say. So as opposed to a geostationary satellite, which hovers over a given spot on the Earth because it's orbiting at the same with the same orbital period as one day, so it orbits every 24 hours over the equator. The Lagrange points would allow the craft to basically hover between two bodies, the Earth and the Moon, or the Earth and the Sun, and while the Earth spins underneath. But good idea, in any case. Ultimately, in the far future, hopefully we have space stations all over the place. In low orbit, medium orbit, geostationary orbit, Lagrange orbits, etc. Balaz Nemeth. Just a fun fact, I included your video to a presentation about Russia-India relations where they covered all the flags in the rocket. It really helped visualize the topic. Glad you found it useful. Yeah, it was an interesting move on their part, covering up the flags of the OneWeb Soyuz, except for India. But again, like I said earlier, there's a lot of rhetoric and back and forthing and tweeting and saber rattling that happens during times of tensions and times of political conflict. And so this, it's not entirely surprising that this would be happening. But let's see. Peter Cortens. Does a better low Earth orbit space station could be a significant benefit in Moon-Mars missions, like for refueling or staging, or is it just a money sink in the near future? So a refueling station in low Earth orbit could be very useful, but it would exist in a fixed orbit. So if that orbit were not optimal for continuing on to the Moon or Mars, then it would be of perhaps limited use. But yes, being able to being able to refuel in low Earth orbit is kind of an old vision of, even Wernher von Braun had visions of, toroidal orbiting space stations and refueling depots and whatever. So could be useful, but again, depending on the delta between the orbit of the refueling depot and the target orbit of, the transfer orbit to the Moon or to Mars. Peter Cortens. I meant with safe deorbit how to prevent it crashes down on a city. Oh, okay. So, so yes, in order to ensure that your deorbiting object does not land on a city or deorbit over potentially populated areas, you just need to time the deorbit burn such that, because we have very careful calculations of deorbiting. We know the density of our atmosphere, and there are some variables in that. That's why we have like landing ellipses, because for example, the ISS, it's a big complicated structure with many different parts sticking out in all directions, and you don't know exactly how it's going to hit the atmosphere or exactly what parts are going to break off when, and so it's not just going to come down, melt into a ball, and then crater at a specific location in the ocean. It's going to rain debris down across a large sort of oval area, but they do know the area that that a deorbiting object will land in if they have controlled the deorbit with a deorbit burn. Now, in the case of an uncontrolled deorbit, such as with the Chinese Long March 5 booster first stage. They did not know exactly where that would come down. It ended up coming down near the Maldives, off the southwest coast of India. But if you're controlling the deorbit, then, yes, you can calculate the region in which it's going to land, in which case you just aim for Point Nemo in the Pacific, and you're good, because nobody lives near there. Now, Fiji will probably get a great view of the space station as it comes in, as it deorbits when that time comes. But other than that, there's not going to be shouldn't be any humans in the middle of the ocean where it actually comes down and impacts. Mark Desire, as long as the surviving deorbiting modules don't hit anyone or anything on Earth's surface, I consider the re-entry safe enough. So, being beamed in the head by deorbiting debris is, I think, I don't know if has any human ever actually been impacted by, physically struck by satellite debris? I don't think so. Now, there have been a few that have been hit, at least one, and maybe a few that have been hit by meteorites. But meteorites enter the Earth's atmosphere pretty much all the time. Satellites aren't constantly deorbiting. So even when satellites come down in areas they're not supposed to, like there was a SpaceX Falcon 9 second stage that came down over Washington State a couple years ago, but it still didn't injure anybody. It came down in an area of farmland or something. But and when the space shuttle Columbia broke up in 2003, it was deposited over a region of Texas, and still didn't hurt anybody, but aside from the astronauts, of course. But nonetheless, we don't want orbital debris falling on potentially populated areas, because it could hurt somebody, and that's bad for everybody, especially the person struck. So Point Nemo is where we aim for. Let's see. Pikachu 3408. Hello from Romania. I want to tell you that we have a bad past with Rogozin. In the past, he fought against our brothers, called us fascists, and threatened to fly into Romania with a bomber. Yeah. Unfortunately, space and politics are very closely intertwined, because with a few exceptions, operations in space are conducted under the auspices of various governments of the world. The United States and Russia and China, India, Japan. There's only a few countries that have an orbital launch capability, and so wherever there are politics, there is going to be some bad blood. And Rogozin isn't what was in fact I forget what he was in charge of, but he was in the government. He wasn't just director of a space agency. He was military. So yes, I'm sorry that you have a colored history with him, but hopefully we can continue moving forward with the ISS to whatever graceful end it does come to, without too much animosity, because the ISS is supposed to transcend national differences, international squabbles between nations, and it's supposed to represent the highest ideal of international cooperation. And if that ultimately is abandoned on bad terms, then I wouldn't exactly call it a failed experiment, but it would be a sad day for sure. But we shall see. In any case, All right. Now I'm caught up with those. Ah, Tig, thank you for your contribution. Very kind. Let's see. Any more questions? Mark Desare says he believes a Cuban cow perished in the early 1960s when a U.S. launch failed. But was that from orbital debris, or was that from a failure to orbit? I don't know. But rip Cuban cow. Evgeny says, I think any orbital stations are important to everyone, primarily for scientific purposes. I would agree. If we consider this for commercial purposes, then only for global colonization. Yeah, so space is becoming increasingly commercial. And unfortunately, so moving forward in aerospace, in space exploration, I think will require the increased participation of private entities, such as SpaceX, etc. That is, space exploration will require an increased level of commercialization. I believe that one unfortunate side effect of the increased commercialization of space will be the decreased amount of scientific experimentation that we do in space, because the ISS is a government project, an international government project whose primary purpose is scientific research, and it's an orbital laboratory first and foremost. And businesses operate, businesses have to keep in mind their bottom line. A business is not going to expend billions of dollars in order to conduct a scientific experiment with no reasonable guarantee of return on their investment. A government can do that. A business ain't going to do that unless they are wildly, charitable in their willingness to spend money for the good of all or whatever. And so I believe that as space becomes more commercialized, it will become less scientifically fruitful, aside from the sort of big ticket, missions, the observatories and whatnot. But hopefully I'm proven wrong. But I mean, business is not known for being at the forefront of scientific discovery. Academia and government-funded projects and things like that tend to be. But all right. Yazata says, a new space race isn't entirely a bad thing. It might stimulate a lot of progress, like in the 60s. Snow Kittens says, but how many fish have perished due to orbital reentry? That could probably be roughly calculated based on the density of fish near the surface in the target areas of the Pacific, where the rockets come, where the debris comes down. All right, so that looks like it will that will about wrap. You know what? Let me start that sentence over again. All right, let me start that sentence a third time. All right, that looks like it will about wrap it up for today. And I thank you for coming, for hanging out, for asking your questions, and I hope you found this episode useful. I expect to be out of town next week, so that will be Sunday, April the 10th. I expect to be on vacation with my family, so there will not be a Space Week next week, but there will be 2 weeks hence when I will get to tell you all about the Axiom launch and anything else that happens in the next 2 weeks. Until that time, keep it raw, take care, and I will catch you later. Bye for now.